Cecere. So we're very excited to learn about some of the insights. We see that we're obviously going to be talking about a certain topic at some point, but we won't get into that yet. First off, we want to give a thank you to Aga, who is the organizer of this event, also Gario for all of his work that he does on the event. And we want to give a shout out to the sponsors. So shout out to Field Collective, they're providing us with the space. And also shout out to the Content Reactor, which is actually my company. So if you want to learn more about that, you can always talk to me afterward. So we're going to get started. We're going to be talking to Joe about something interesting, so consumer expectations.
Yes.
But before we get into that, we want to get to know Joe better. So Joe, I have a question for you that I did not prep you on. I did not tell Gario about this question either. It's one that I like to ask people. So Joe, what did your childhood smell like?
Donuts.
Donuts, okay. Why donuts?
I grew up, my parents owned, my dad was a baker. Both my parents are from Italy, and I grew up, he went from baking to owning a restaurant, and his specialty was making homemade bread and homemade donuts. He would take the bread dough and fry it and then dip it in sugar, and that was my treat as a little kid. So I remember that smell of those donuts every morning when I'd go with my dad to the restaurant.
Awesome. And I was hoping you would say that because that's a fantastic segue into our first point. So, Joe, tell us when you decided that you wanted to be a graphic designer.
At the restaurant. So like I said, when I was 6 years old, I used to go there with my dad and help him. My first job was to clean out the toaster oven trays, the crumbs in the toaster ovens.
Okay.
That was a big job for me. But I also would start to make their special signs. So I would take poster board and Sharpie markers, and meatball sandwich $2.99 was a highlight special of mine. I would use Italian colors for it, and I knew back then that there was something around typography and design and marketing that I liked, even though I was 8 years old. And that's when it started. I've never shifted. I've always wanted to do what I do today, and it started back then.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit more about the poster boards. What are we talking about here? Were these words? Were you sketching stuff out? What did those look like?
I was sketching it out. I would go to the local Snyder drugstore and get my supplies, and I would, I was 8. I tried to draw a meatball sandwich and big numbers and starbursts, but it would always be something different. But I just loved the design. It wasn't just about drawing and design. It was about putting a message out there. I knew what I was creating had to elicit some response from customers. And that's weird to say now, but I knew I was making a sign to say something versus just drawing a picture.
Right.
And that's where it kind of evolved to knowing I wanted to do something in marketing and design. And here I am.
Very good. I think that when I was 8, I figured out you could put hair on stick figures. And that was a big moment for me. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of young experiences with design. So you also had something really noteworthy that happened during high school, right?
Right. So I had a lot of mentors in my life with design. So my dad being an entrepreneur and opening a restaurant, even though he came from Italy with nothing but a grade school education, he was my first mentor. My second mentor was in high school. Mrs. Coletti was my art teacher, and she was an amazing teacher, and she introduced me more to what graphic design was and what design, advertising, what that all was. And I took a class of hers, and during that class they had a competition to design the local cable access channel's logo in the Mounds View, New Brighton area of Minnesota. And they asked all the area high schools to submit designs, and of course this was a big deal for me. I could do something, and so I designed the logo for North Suburban Access Cable Channel. Mine won. I won like a $15 check, which was my first payday. Hey. and they used the logo, and it was hand drawn. It was the letters NSA with a picture of a TV camera. But it was a cool thing to learn how to. It was kind of my first client challenge. And again, understanding how to communicate something in a logo was the first kind of design challenge I had.
Okay, awesome. So then these early beginnings. Something I always like to ask people is, do you think that you had a higher degree of passion than others, or was it natural talent?
I think it's a little of both. I'm not a great, I can't sit down and draw something. My son's an amazing artist. It's not that. I do think it was a passion. I knew I loved it right away. I was hooked to it. I never doubted it. And it's the one thing, and I think one of the one things in my life that I've never doubted. I mean, from 8 years old to the college I picked to the career I picked, I've always wanted to do it. So I think it's more passion because I knew I connected to it.
Okay, very good. So no imposter syndrome at any point in that. You were always sure of this.
No, there's imposter syndrome.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, especially as you progress in your career, going from a designer where I'm an artist to becoming a design leader. There's different expectations and different thoughts and what I should or shouldn't be. But at my core, what I love doing, that's never gone away. And I try to have that be infused in everything I do. So
okay, very good. Yeah, and that carried over to your college experience. So you mentioned to me that you went to MCAD. Mm-hmm. Could you talk to us a little bit about that experience?
Yes. So I went to, even though my parents knew I had a love for design, it was a little hard for them to hear me that my choice was MCAD. Both my brothers, I have two older brothers. One's an attorney and one's the CEO of U.S. Bank. And they both went to St. Thomas. So when I said I wanted to go to Minneapolis College of Art and Design, it was a little shock to my parents. But I knew at that time, I did my research. I knew that was one of the best design schools in the country. It was an amazing experience. One of the things I value most, and I was just talking about this yesterday, one of our new designers, was my first 2 years of college. We did everything very old school. We hand set type. We didn't have computers, so we had to use typography books to build layouts. We had to use stack cameras. We did everything very old school. My third year of college, we got our first Macintosh computers in, and then we shifted to do stuff on the computers. Mm-hmm. So I had 2 years of training of cutting type and doing it by hand, and 2 years of training on a computer. And I value that 2 years of training doing hand type and learning from instructors that had a history of doing this. I had some of the great, Peter Seitz was one of my instructors, German designer that's world known as a designer, graphic designer, was one of my instructors. Mm-hmm. Jan Jancourt, another great typographer that studied at Cranbrook. I mean, these guys were guys that knew type before there were typefaces on a computer. So I value that. That education was huge for me to learn that, and it's molded the way I think about everything now. I think it's kind of sad that students today don't have that a little bit more of that training, because I think it would help them see things differently.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about seeing things differently, what kind of things would a designer who's only worked on a computer maybe not see compared to someone who's hand cut their own typeface?
Yeah. It's composition and getting a message across in the most powerful way. I think there's a speed and efficiency to using a computer and setting type that way. But when you're cutting each letter and putting it through a sticky tape machine and laying it down on a piece of paper and then putting an overlay piece of paper on that to do another line, and you're spending intimate time with that typography, and so aesthetically it's gonna look better. But you're just more mindful of what you're building, I think, because you're spending so much more time with it, that it just helps your mind think a little clearer on what the message you're trying to put together.
Right. It's probably a meditative process for you as you're thinking about it and understanding really how these components work together.
It is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about post MCAD. So tell us about how you started at Little.
At MCAD, Monica Little, the founder of Little & Company, she came in to teach part of a semester. And she brought her business experience to teach our class, and we hit it off immediately. I was obsessed with that class. I think her project was to design a brochure for a paper company. And I worked day and night to try to, I just loved it. And we hit it off. And over the years, we stayed in touch a little bit. And after college, I worked at Martin Williams, which was an advertising agency in town. And after being there for 8 years, Monica called me up and said there was a position open, and she wanted me to come there. And I loved Martin Williams. It was a big, established, wonderful company. But I knew Little & Company had a reputation of the best designers in Minneapolis. So I went over there. And at that time, they're a small company, but I knew the design quality was there. So I went over there. And now I've been there for 20 years. 20 years this year.
Fantastic. So why do you think that Little was uniquely set up to cultivate your journey as a designer?
Monica Monica's a trained designer. Monica also went to MCAD. She's a business person first, but she's a design thinker.
Mm-hmm.
She established an atmosphere there of design first and design thinking first that I think at that time was unique, and I still kind of think it's unique. It's at our core to everything we do. We've never we've had to adapt over the years based on our clients' needs and based on the work atmosphere. But at our core, design being something that's true to us has just helped my career and helped. That's why I've been there so long. And I credit Monica for establishing a company in that way because she believed in it, and it allows all of us to believe in it.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So now we've talked about you, right? We've talked about how you started out at 8 years old, how you've moved up, risen through the ranks to now be leading Little. So let's talk a little bit about the consumer now, because no matter how good we are as a business leader, as a business person, the consumer is really the person who matters in a lot of the stuff that we deal with. So we're going to talk a little bit about consumer expectations and how they're going to affect the business of design. So I was thinking from my own experience, there are times where you might want to make a special dinner. Grandma's coming over, so you're going to make a lasagna or whatever. And a lot of times what happens to me is I'm in the aisle and I'm looking for roasted red peppers. I never buy roasted red peppers except this time. I have no brand preference. I don't know which one will taste better. But for some reason, I'm drawn to the $6 one. And it's something about the packaging, it's something about the messaging, right? How does that experience tie into consumer expectations?
It's a lot goes into that. So it's first understanding who that consumer you're going after is. So really understanding what type of person that is. We talk a lot about our first journey with a consumer is understanding the mindset of a consumer. So it's not demographic; it's how they think. So it could be any age or any background, but there's a certain mindset to certain kinds of consumers. And then understanding how they think, how they shop, where they shop, is all data that we bring in the beginning of a project to understand them and apply that to the design of whatever we're designing to attract their attention.
Yeah.
So a lot of it are subtle cues that we understand based on that client, and then we can apply to package or advertising or marketing materials to get their attention. Do you really pick up the $6 peppers? Is it just because of price, or what about the?
I think that's the design, it's the messaging. Because I say to myself, there must be something about this. And it could just be the price. It could be worried that my grandma is going to think I cheaped out on the roasted red peppers or something. That's always possible. So
yeah.
But I think it ties into something that we talked about is somebody else is setting consumer expectations as typically not your business. Could you talk to us a little bit about who's actually setting those expectations?
Who's setting customer expectations?
Yeah, the consumer expectations.
Yeah. Well, the consumer is setting the consumer expectations. They are, it's interesting with design. Consumers, there's what's going to attract and get their attention. It's what they're looking for. But design is in a really special place right now where consumers are seeing so much of it and so much good design out there. They're a lot more savvy than they've ever been, and they have expectations that are higher than they've ever been. So to go out there with something that's so-so, I don't think is going to fly as well anymore because there's so much out there that isn't so-so. And I think clients have that higher expectation and are hungry for good experiences, for beautiful experiences, for smart, easy experiences, because they're getting it everywhere from their iPhone to their car to their Apple Watch, whatever it is. They're seeing this everywhere in their life. So, we have to understand that your journey down the aisle at the grocery store, it's not just about the other things in the grocery store, it's about all the other things in your life. All the other things you see from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep affect how you pick up that jar of peppers, and we have to understand that.
Okay, very good. So then thinking about how a company can really meet those expectations. So if we think of any small product, maybe from a smaller company, they're competing with the Whole Foods of the world, Amazon, people who have millions and millions of dollars invested in design and consumer knowledge, all that kind of stuff. So what does a small company like that really need to do to be able to compete?
Yeah, we talk about something at Little, branding from the inside out. So what we mean by that is every organization, whether you're 2 people or 2 million people, you have a core story, you have a core purpose of your organization, a core reason for being. Our job is to uncover that purpose. That's step one. So the smallest company can compete with the biggest company if they understand who they are. And if they understand who they are and what makes them unique, and they understand their story, then we could take that story and bring it to life in whatever execution we need to bring it. It's that authenticity that if it's done right, I believe consumers could sense that and feel it and will connect with it. It's if you go out there and try to compete just to compete and you're not true to who you are, then I believe you're going to fail. So that's our philosophy with all of our work. We go in, we understand the background, we understand the story, we talk to the founders, we hear the history, we learn all about who they are, we uncover that thing that makes them tick and unique, and then we make that shine.
And you call that, when we spoke originally, you called it communicating vision.
Yes.
So how would you define company vision?
Company vision, well, I think we talked about company purpose. We talked about vision and purpose, but the big one is company purpose. Why do you exist? If I want to talk to an organization and say, why are you here today? If you were gone tomorrow, would people care? And if being here today, why do they care that you're here? What is your purpose in this world? That's the top of everything for us. With that purpose in place, with that understanding, then what is your vision moving forward? Where do you want to go from there? With this core understanding of who you are, then what's next? You want to grow to be whatever size? Do you want to introduce new products? Let's build that vision together, but it's got to be based in that core purpose, your foundation. Everything stems from that.
Right. So then would you say that in the work that you do at Little, there is a large element of business consulting?
Is there a large element of it?
Yeah.
There is. There is we are brought in as a brand agency to help define the companies we work with as brands. And sometimes that brand initiative is a pretty substantial, big consulting initiative before we get to any work.
Right.
But even in the smallest projects, there is a little bit of that. I don't know if it's business consulting, but it's more of that strategic uncovering of who they are as an organization before we get into design work.
Right. Okay. Very good. And we know that we have some packaging here. So I think now might be a good time to talk about some of this packaging. Could you talk us through a little bit about maybe some of the purposes of these companies that you've worked with and how you walk them through that discovery process?
Sure. So I think packaging is just one element, an example of the work we do, but it's fun to see kind of before and afters of some of the companies we work with. So this is one organization, Vermont Creamery, based in Vermont. It started with a chef from France that came over to Vermont, and chefs on the East Coast were missing quality goat cheese in their restaurants. There was nowhere to get good goat cheese. So sourcing a farm and goats and making cheese the way it's supposed to be made, this company was started. And we started working with them, and our first step is to go visit them. And we got off the plane in Vermont. Our first trip was to the farm to meet the goats to make the cheese.
Okay.
And
did you get to milk a goat?
We didn't milk a goat. I pet a goat, and it didn't bite me or anything. But
that's close.
but we saw the goats. We met the CEO. We met some of the farmers and people who did that. Then we went to the facility where they make the cheese, and we met the cheesemakers and went through the process and wore our booties and full bodysuits so in this clean facility to see all this cheese, and we tried the cheese on the floor. And then we sat down in the headquarters and we learned about the history and we learned about the meaning of the company. And there was all this amazing things that they did right. There was a level of quality that far surpassed any of their competitors. There was a heritage that existed. There was a love for everything they did as a company. And the packaging they had at the time, which was fairly successful. I mean, they were doing okay, but it felt was their packaging when we started working with them. A couple examples. It felt very commercial. It didn't feel like the small goat farm that we went to. It didn't feel like I didn't see the history and the heritage in this. They're a B Corp, which is a way of doing business that a lot of organizations can't claim. And they weren't coming across that way. So learning about that, we built their brand platform, their brand story, the foundational elements of the brand. And then we we redid their look and feel and their personality. So we went from this idea to this idea, and just more of a softer, natural, more approachable package. It's hard to see here, but we did an illustration that is on all of their packaging that shows the farm, that shows the goats, that shows shows it represents sustainability, which is a big part of their company. Talks about being made in Vermont, which is a heritage thing and a element of pride for them. So just going from this to this, a consumer is going to see this and they're going to get a different feel from this than they do from this. And it's going to be more reflective of the product that it's inside. And that's where at the grocery aisle, when they're seeing these things, why are they going to pick this one up? There's going to be reasons and connections that we know the consumer is looking for that have to be illustrated in something like this.
Yeah, and then when we talked about this packaging, there are a lot of decisions that go into it. So you mentioned the illustrations, that's a visual design element. But then if we think about the feel of the packaging, how does the actual material that's made out of differ in the before and after?
Yeah, it's interesting with food packaging. There's obviously some restrictions all the time, but feel of, this is a very shiny, hard plastic, and this is a little bit softer paper and softer plastic and softer color palette. That all matters too, the feel and touch of it. And then there's things like just really tactical, simple solutions to do with packaging. So this is another company we work with. The name of the company is Bug, B-U-G-G. They make, these guys are incredible, and they make the best bug spray you've ever had. It doesn't smell, it's not sticky, and it actually works, so it kills bugs. But they came to us, and this was their existing packaging, and they're based in Minnesota, and their name is Bug. I mean, if you're a company that sells bug spray and your name is Bug, it's a pretty cool thing. And when you're going on a camping trip or you're at Ace Hardware and you need to pick up bug spray, you got to get something that works, and you got to get something that attracts your eye. So we leveraged their name in the new packaging. So this is the before and after of this. This was a circumstance where let's get the name big. Let's get it noticeable. Let's create a system so that you could tell, because these guys are scientists, and there's sprays for gnats, there's sprays for mosquitoes, there's really great technology behind this, making that super clear. So sometimes it's, this wasn't about touchy-feely heritage, things like that. This is about getting a message out quick and effectively so people pick up your product.
And that makes sense too with the illustration, because the drawing of the bug almost looks like an anatomy lesson on there. So it goes back to that scientific feeling. And then thinking about the product itself, going back to the packaging idea, it's in these brown glass bottles that we typically associate with a more natural product. Is that something that you then go and test on shelves and you see how consumers react to this versus maybe off that's in a metal can? Or how do you test that?
We did it with this. Sometimes we do test products, and it's both design and form factor. And form factor is a combination of what's doable and feasible from a financial standpoint and from a manufacturing standpoint to what's going to appeal to the consumer. There was other tests for Bug, particularly. We did look at aerosol cans that were white. We looked at other things from a manufacturing standpoint, if it makes sense. So there's limitations with that too. For Vermont Creamery, this is phase 1 of their packaging. We also have concepts that are going to move into phase 2, which even push it further to maybe more wood. Some of their products are in little wood crates. Some will have some wraps around it, a little bit more techniques to the printing. As the technology progresses and we figure out efficient ways to do it, we try to push those things because that adds to the experience.
Right. Okay. Very good. So I wanted to touch on one more point related to this. So we talked about a little bit already the different things that you try to learn about the consumers. And you mentioned mindset was a big thing. And for me, that was kind of a game changer in my mind when we talked about it, because typically we think of buyer personas and it's like, this is how much money they make, this is their job, this is their family life, these are their goals and challenges. So how does mindset come into play? And you mentioned with Vermont Creamery, that was something that really came into play.
Yeah, because mindset, Vermont Creamery, they have a whole suite of products from higher end aged goat cheese to goat cheese crumbles that you put on your salad. So there's a pretty big range. And understanding the mindset of someone who appreciates a sustainable product, they appreciate that they're a B Corp, They are looking for a level of quality, not at a level price point, but a level of quality and care that's made into the food.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that the way that person thinks versus their demographic is what guides our work. So knowing, because then you broaden the audience too. It's a 18-year-old shopping, that's out of college or in college, to my mom going to the store picking this up. It doesn't matter what their background is, but they have the same values,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding what their values are going to help guide what we do for the work.
Mm-hmm.
Values are a big thing, and that's where mindset, it revolves a lot around people's values and what they look for.
Right. And that probably goes back to organizational alignment too, because if you think of a business like Vermont Creamery, they have a process that you were able to go and see and experience for yourself. And then the packaging doesn't really reflect their values as an organization. Is that something that you're taking into account as well?
Yes, and everything should reflect the values of the organization. That's something, beyond packaging, when we go in and look at a brand, understanding and uncovering that brand story and their values and their core, then that needs to come across in everything, in the way they talk, in the way their building looks, in the way they have internal meetings. Everything should ladder back to that. And you see organizations that go away from their values, and you see what happens to them. I mean, we've seen in recent years organizations that didn't stay true to their values, and problems start, right?
Yeah.
And so I think understanding what those are and making sure you're consistent with them in everything you do, that's another thing that we push really hard. It can't just end up being in a campaign. It has to be it has to thread through everything you do as an organization. So when we look at a brand, like Vermont Creamery, I'm just showing you the packaging here, but we looked at their internal process. We looked at how they show up at trade shows and events. We looked at their offices, the website. I mean, everything that touches the brand ladders back up to the values that they have.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And I mean, obviously, this is something that works for organizations. Your clients have seen success with it. But now we want to kind of speak to the audience and think about how can they start to put this into practice. And you already mentioned that little. This packaging is a small part of what you do for your clients. You really touch the broader brand, everything that they really produce that is branded. Mm-hmm. So now if we think about the audience, we have people who are maybe designers, maybe they're graphic designers, they could be working in product packaging, they could be web designers, they could be designing a customer experience or setting up their business a certain way. Let's talk about how they can start to use some of these ideas. So we talked about uncovering your brand's purpose, your vision, your story. What are some of the best exercises that a company could go through to uncover this?
A series of exercises. We start with interviewing people and talking to people in the organization and outside of the organization. So people that employees, and we talk to customers, and we talk to partners and vendors to get a take on what they believe is special about their company, and we talk to customers to ask them what they believe is special. Mm-hmm. We do workshops with people where it's amazing what happens when you get a group of employees in a room for a few hours to just think about the business and get away from their day-to-day work. And we use exercises to start to draw things out of their heads. Mm-hmm. Exercises that even if you ask certain questions, people, it's trying to draw things out of them and then start to connect the dots. Monica Little, our founder, always used this analogy that if you put a group of 10 people in a room and you tell them to all imagine a bridge, they're all going to imagine a bridge, but I may imagine, the bridge over Main Street and over the St. Croix, and mm-hmm. someone will imagine a Golden Gate Bridge. It'll all be different bridges. It's getting that out of their head and then start to understand why they're thinking that way and then to connect the dots. So once we start doing that, what's amazing is if you get employees in an organization together to start talking about the business, things start to connect together and start to thread together. And actually people that are thinking different things, there becomes a lot of overlap. And you take those overlaps and you take those things that start to connect and you start to formulate the commonality. What are you thinking? And it's great. These workshops we've rebranded. Our favorites are we've rebranded a few law firms.
Okay.
And when you get a group of lawyers in a
That would
room
be a challenge.
the brand, that's pretty amazing. But you get great things out of it, right? And and then we take that information, we go away, we start to go, okay, we're feeling this, we're feeling these things overlap, and there's a common thing here. They believe in this. They believe they stand for this. And it's usually there. We always talk about, we're not, in no circumstance are we creating the brand for these organizations. It's there. We got to go find it. It's there somewhere. We got to uncover it and find it.
Let's say that you're leading this process internally at your company. Maybe you have a company founder, a company leader who's much more analytical. Because to me, this feels like emotion-based marketing that is validated through analytics and testing, right? So how do you create a shift in that leader's mindset so that they start to think, our purpose does really matter to people. Our story does matter to people. They're going to connect with us.
Well, some metrics are harder than others, but you look at everything from employee retention and recruitment and the power of understanding the brand and what you could do for employees. And if you have employees that understand the brand, they're going to be more effective employees, which more effective employees contribute to a more effective workplace, which contributes to more sales and more profit. I mean, everything ladders back up to that from an employee standpoint. You can use metrics of coming across with your true story. How do sales look of your product? One of our packaging products we did for Frick's Ham out of Washington, Missouri. They make ham products, and this is a commodity item that they're at the grocery aisle trying to pick up a ham for Easter dinner. Their sales increased incredibly since we redid their packaging, and their packaging is more reflective, their identity is more reflective of who they are as an organization. It didn't start from just a pretty design. It started from a core of who they are as an organization and applied to a beautiful label. And their sales have gone up. So we try to we identify what metrics we want to hit. We pull metrics from past experiences and get them to understand the power of understanding this.
Okay, good, very good. And then we talked a little bit about, maybe you've uncovered this story, you understand the purpose. Now you have this broad array of different designs, different marketing assets. What do you now need to do with all those assets that you have on hand?
The organization, continue to update and continue to make sure the message is across everything you do. So once the foundation is set, the brand foundation is set, that's only the beginning. And once an initial launch of work comes out, that's only the beginning. It's making sure that everything you do moving forward always connects back to that. It's much, it goes beyond just the initial package or campaign. So our job is to make sure that they have the tools, whether we're involved or not, that they have the tools to continue to bring this message forward.
Okay, very good. And then how do you decide when it's time to maybe kill a design, kill a creative direction that you've been following at a company?
Well, if it's ready to market, when do we decide? It's we test things and we make sure it's successful, and we see if something's not selling, or if people aren't reacting to something, or if internally employees aren't understanding the brand through surveys or things like that. We'll analyze that and make shifts if we have to make shifts. That doesn't happen often. I mean, we do a lot of homework beforehand, so it doesn't happen. So we do it right. There's times when we have to update things, and that's just the nature of like refreshing. Messages may need to be refreshed, looks and feels may need to be refreshed, and that's just kind of looking at the state of things, looking at the state of the competition, and refreshing it.
Okay, very good. And then thinking about the future of the company and where it goes with that purpose. So I was thinking of musicians, a lot of the greatest musicians over time who have had staying power, so people like David Bowie or Prince or whoever it might be, they have reinvented themselves over the years. Thinking about brands, so Vermont Creamery, Bridgman's, whoever it might be, what kind of cycle should they follow to continue reinventing themselves and making sure that they're true to their story and purpose?
Understanding, I think it goes back to our beginning where we started with the consumer. Understanding the consumer is going to change and evolve over time. The mindset's going to stay similar, but things in their world is changing constantly. Not only the way they buy food, like the Vermont Creamery, but everything changing in their world is always evolving. So understanding how the consumer is evolving is key to them staying current. Shifting from their purpose and who they are should not happen. They should understand who they are at their core. The execution, the outward-facing look and feel of that may change based on the consumer, but staying true to the core. I think organizations that have failed have gone too far away from that core and have tried to completely reinvent themselves and goes in a different direction without going to a new place and not even understanding what that new place is before they got there is where they fail. So I think staying true to your core, but then understanding how the consumer is evolving.
Okay, excellent. Well, this has been a very enlightening conversation, and we want to keep it going. So I think now we want to open it up to the audience a little bit. We want to get some of your questions and be able to keep digging into this topic. So who has a question? Brent, go ahead.
Joe, I'm curious about the composition of the teams that you put together for a project like this. If I were going out to Vermont Creamery, touring the place and coming back and distilling all of this, what types of roles are in the team that works on that?
Yeah. So we have 3 core areas with all of our teams. It's strategy, creative, and production or project management. And they are a threesome from start to finish in a project. So having a strategy director that thinks from a strategic lens, having a creative director that thinks from a creative lens, but they're collaborating in the beginning. It's not a bucket brigade where the strategy director starts it and hands it to a creative director, because I think you need both of those mindsets at the table. That's the core of our teams. The other, and then project management, making sure that no matter how good the strategy and creative is, if it's not produced in a good way, it's going to fail. So making sure this color turns out the right way when it's printed. The other thing we'll add at a brand standpoint is an account planner that'll help facilitate those workshops we talked about, or help dig out some of that stuff when we're building the brand.
About how many people are in follow-up on?
For a team?
Yeah.
Or in our company?
No, for a team on a project. You talk about 10 people or just 2 or 3?
5. Yeah, the 3 core, and then maybe a account planner, and then a designer or 2 brought in.
Good. Yes.
I've gone through branding exercises both as an employee of a big corporation and as a brand communicator in small independent agencies. And I'm always fascinated by the psychology of the exercise. And I've been called a therapist. I've been called a therapist by clients who have helped do this kind of thing. What's that like? What's your experience with that for Vermont Creamery, for example?
Being a therapist?
I mean, you get pushback from any number of people on who don't like change or who think your design direction's wrong. You know what I mean? There's all sorts of different psychologies that people bring, that employees bring to change like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we run into that, and it's we have a slide in our deck for when we talk to new clients. It says we design things people want with people that want designed things, and the reason we put that slide in there is that we get the most fulfillment when we're working at people that are super passionate about that story. And Vermont Creamery was a great example. We sat down with the CEO, and to hear her talk about the vision of the company, the process of the product, what she believed in it almost makes our job easy. When we have to go into an organization and try to change the mind of a CEO that their brand story is important, and we have to try to convince them, that typically doesn't work. It's hard to convince someone that's not believing in it themselves. So it's we deal with that, but not as much, because we connect with clients that have that passion and belief in it, and that's going to make it that much more successful. I can't convince someone that thinks they just need a campaign to just increase sales and they don't really believe they have a story. It's hard to do that.
Chris.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so I started in design 20 years ago when you started at little. How do you feel that social media is affecting the way that brands are being applied to companies? Feel like consumers kind of own the brand a little bit more than they used to? Have you guys done anything differently with clients to sort of accommodate that?
Yeah, the consumers do have more ownership in the brand through social media, because so much is happening so quickly. Trying to help them with their channels to make sure there's that consistent thread of their brand story coming to life is one thing we try to do. Not to veer off from that. And one of our clients, some of our smaller clients that we've looked at their social channels and it's all over the board, and trying to hone in on them understanding why it's all over the board, because they're trying to say so many different messages, and if they stick to that core message, and they're consistent in their core message, that's going to help their consumers kind of connect with it a little bit better and spread that core message even further. So again, it goes back to that purpose. I think understanding what that is going to make everything more consistent, whether you're touching it or not.
I'm just curious how many variations that you show clients.
Well, Vermont Creamery is good and bad example. Sometimes we fill a wall with stuff, and typically for packaging and identity work and brand work, we'll bring in multiple designers because we want to go really wide with the design. And for Vermont Creamery, we literally filled a wall of looks because we had to go based on the story. They were all kind of in the same area of the brand story that we covered, but we went really wide. We knew that the client had a design sensibility and they would appreciate looking at that kind of work. But we don't do that just to do it. If it feels natural and it feels right with the client, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll present 5 concepts.
It can be overwhelming.
It could be overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just spoke to a client the other night at an event, and she was telling me a different firm presented 7 concepts to her, and she was so mad. She was so overwhelmed. I'm like, oh, I get it. Sometimes 7 is too much. You got to know the client. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
How do you work with a client that doesn't understand the value of branding? Like they say, it's not budgetary. You know what I mean? If you go to, say, a smaller company that needs to revamp or whatever, they just don't see the value in the brand. They'd rather put it into production or put it into a factory or something like that, but they're still losing sales.
Yeah.
How do you convey there's a value, why it costs, what it costs to do?
Yeah. We show some of those and talk about some of those metrics and success that we've had with other clients, how it helps with employee retention, how it helps with recruitment, how it helps with all the things it helps with. We try to give them hard core numbers and proof that it could work. But it goes back to what I said earlier. If they're not at least a little bit curious about it, it's really hard to convince them on that. And those aren't the type of clients we typically work with, because what ends up happening is the work suffers in the end for both of us. We're not getting a product that we're proud of, and they're not getting something that's going to work if they at least don't have a little belief in what a brand could do for them. But the really hardcore ones, we just have to show them the results that have existed in other case studies we've worked on.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So how do you get, I really like this Vermont Creamery thing, right? Because you're getting into authentic stories and great ingredients. And so mine is kind of about the buzzword part of it, right? Because you can be supporting a food brand like that, and they're all using the same language, right? They're using locally sourced, beautiful goats, fresh chefs, all those kinds of things. So how do you differentiate through that landscape and get the what's that?
We do a lot of competitive research. We do a lot of comparative shopping to see what's out there. But starting with that story about, they can own goats on their package because they use goats. We've been to the goat farm, right? So the companies that put a goat on their packaging or a cow or a natural thing on their packaging, like a big organization that tries to look small and natural, that tries to fake it, I believe the consumer is going to sniff that out eventually. So first and foremost, understanding what they really truly can own, and then do some comparative shopping.
And in this conversation, I'm heading into it's a small family-owned food-based company here in the city. It's been around for 75 years, so it's an authentic city. They probably know it's out there, but they're not finding traction that was easier in the past, with all the competitors that come in talking a lot of the same buzzwords.
Yeah. And food packaging we find is extremely competitive right now. The design bar on food packaging has got higher and higher. That's also part of the reason we'll bring in multiple designers on the work. Our design team's built with people from very different backgrounds. So once we have here's the story of Vermont Creamery, now go wide on it. And so then we get to explore a lot of different stuff so that we can get something that's differentiated.
And you find that, I'll stop asking, but and you find that as you start, that really authentic storytelling, is your agency then also responsible for, getting it out on all channels? So, packaging, print,
That's what we typically do, and that's what we prefer to do. If we rarely get a project coming in that someone says we just need a website or we just need a brochure anymore. It's help us with our brand story and get it on. Here's our core thing, whether it be packaging, but it has to expand to everything.
Yes.
We might have that idea, but in the long run, it seems like sometimes people want to stay with the same, maybe small companies. So how do you deal with somebody that wants to really make a big difference in their life, and then they settle on a very small thing? How do you convince them that they should go big?
Well, sometimes we don't convince them to go big. U.S. Bank's a great example. So we rebranded U.S. Bank a couple years ago. We did everything but change the logo. So the logo, through our research and through our learnings, had equity with consumers. We would never do something just to do it, to change it. It has to be based in meaning and has to be effective for the client. So in that case for U.S. Bank, it didn't make any sense to change the logo. From a financial standpoint and from an equity standpoint, it didn't make any sense. When we uncovered what their issue was, that people didn't understand what U.S. Bank stood for. It was seen as a very vanilla bank with no real personality, and internally that didn't exist. Employees had this great ethic-driven culture for the bank. They were one of the, they were darlings on Wall Street. They had this great reputation everywhere but with their core consumers that didn't know who they were. So we'll uncover those challenges first and then solve the challenges and the problems. And sometimes that means a total overhaul, and sometimes it means a tweak. What?
I like the genuine.
Yes. Thank you.
So I'm wondering how this work that you do has changed you as a consumer.
Ooh, that's a good question. How's it changed? Well, that's a hard question because I've always been very critical of design work and experiences. That's just since I was 8 years old. So, but it has me looking more and paying attention more to everything, to every experience. I think you could fall short so quick if you just focus on one thing. And understanding, the thing that hit me the most is when I started thinking about like what we all experience every day in our lives from a design standpoint and product standpoint, the things we see every day and how they all affect each other. I noticed that more. Like the layout on my car dashboard to when I go buy a product at the grocery store, that all has an effect on me, and I noticed it more. And I think more and more consumers are noticing that more. So I think for me, it's just having more of my eyes open to everything.
I'm wondering if you're willing to share how you strictly present to clients and how your team does that.
How we present to clients? We bring them along the journey from the very beginning. We don't. It's very collaborative. So like I said, when we're building brands, we workshop with them together. We go away a little bit, but we bring back initial concepts. We bring them along the journey is an important part of our work, because we never want to get to a place where we're unveiling something that they didn't kind of help build. That's an important part of rebranding, is especially in a big, complex organization. Having people help build the new brand is important, because if you try to just build it in a closet somewhere and then unveil it to them, people aren't going to be able to grab hold to it. So it's very collaborative. Hi, neighbor.
Can you speak to how technology is influencing design, things like AI, VR?
Sure. This may be a lame answer. I think it affects design, but in only a small way. I think design at its core is always the same. And I feel like in the 40 years Little has been around, the design expression or design thinking has to be first and foremost. the vehicle in which you deliver it is always going to change. So if you think about VR first, instead of thinking about the design solution first, I think it's going to fail. So I love all this new technology. I love the way to get these experiences to consumers in different ways. But it's got to start with a great idea. It's got to start in a great vision and a great design execution, and then apply to that technology. We've seen firms that I think start with technology, or we've seen clients that say, I want something, I want something in VR. I want an experience in VR. And if you start there, I don't think it's as successful starting with the core of design.
We're in a space that is that big growth has become very specialized, and people that are wanting flexibility, and the world of work has really changed. How has your agency adapted to that? Do you hire a lot of freelancers? Do you hire just the core people and ebb and flow as project work changes? How do you address that, or how has it evolved?
We do exactly that. We have our core group of those core areas I talked to you about: strategy, design, production. And then we allow space for bringing in contractors of different skill sets. I love it now because there's so much great, diverse, unique talent, especially in our city, with all different kinds of backgrounds, whether you're a content photographer, or you're a video editor, or you're a director. And our client needs are changing so much. So when we're doing a rebrand, when we want to execute that brand, we have this whole palette of people in our city that we can tap into to bring it to life in new and exciting ways. So it's for me, it's the most exciting time in our industry because we have so much diverse talent out there, and I think it's essential to have that kind of talent. And we'll always have that space for freelance because we can never hire, another 50 people to cover everything. And I want to be able to cover everything because who knows what we're going to create. If we create a virtual reality experience, or we create a environment, we might need an architect and an interior designer in some circumstances. So having that space to do that is important. We also, with our full-time employees, have a very flexible atmosphere. We have no PTO. It's flexible PTO, so people could come and go and work where they want to stay inspired, because I think that's really important. Yeah.
Right here.
Could you talk a little bit about your collaboration process you do with the clients? You said, you don't design in a vacuum, but kind of some of the methods or the steps you do in that collaboration.
Yeah. So an example of like the brand workshop that I talked about, building the brand, those exercises we go to we're all sitting at the table as one team. We're not presenting to them. We're building things together. We're building collages of images to get to some kind of feeling. We're doing word bubbles to get to some kind of feeling. And the most successful brand platform workshops we have is when we're walking out of there and the client actually came up with the brand, or defined the brand. And that's what we're getting to. So they walk out saying, those law firms I was talking to, that one of the attorneys, one of the partners had the idea. Once we all started collaborating, spit it out, we got it on the board, and that was it. And so they have that ownership from the beginning. And when we get to creative, we typically have a conference room, formal conference room, and then we have stand-up whiteboard labs. 99% of the time we present in those labs with tissue paper, and we're in there pulling things down, putting things up, drawing on the paper together with the client. Again, we're building it with them. So it's a mentality of we've joined teams together and we're doing it together versus you hire an agency or a vendor to present to you.
In the back.
I'm curious if you do service design, and if you do, how does that play out in your process?
Do we do service design? Can you explain more what you mean by that?
Yeah, so let's just take US Bank. You uncover in some of your research that how they're interacting with the consumer isn't what the consumer wants.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to actually design the service, do process design
Right.
in order to deliver the value, that brand to the consumer.
We do a little bit of that. We don't claim to be a consultant in getting really deep in how that experience happens, but based on the brand and so we'll partner with certain people to make sure that the brand is coming across in every experience to the consumer in the most effective way. So we don't go super deep in that, but when it comes to the brand experience, we do.
We have time for one more right here.
We've seen as designers and stuff online and everything, colossal failures with rebrands.
Mm-hmm.
You know, has Little ever presented something to the consumer and has such a negative backlash? And if so, how do you recover with that as an agency and or with the client?
No, we've never done anything. Negative backlash. Let me think. I don't think we've done anything at the scale of that where there is that. You've seen the gaps and you've seen the people that have done identity changes. I question how much of it was we think we need a new look and feel versus a reason behind it. Sure. So again, with our stuff, we try to make sure there's a purpose and a reason to what we're doing and not just to do it. The US Bank example, that was a major rebrand. It would have been fun to, in full disclosure, I designed the US Bank logo when I was a young designer at Mount Williams. And I honestly, I don't know, do you work at US Bank? No. Okay. I don't like the logo. It's not one of my favorite logos, right? So I'm now the president of a company that gets to rebrand US Bank. I would have loved to redesign that logo. I would have loved it to finally do it right. Because when I did it as a young designer, it was committee driven and it was so much politics in it. And the logo they ended up picking was almost beyond my control as a young designer. So now I'm the president of Little & Company. We get to redesign US Bank. It's like, holy crap, let's redo it. It didn't make sense to redo it. Even though as much as I wanted to, it did not make sense to redo it. And it was smart, we didn't. And now it's up on a stadium and I see it every day.
All right, very good.
Thank you so much, Joe, Alex.
Thank you.